are going to be wiped out because of COVID-19 and the refusal to
their apartment buildings in the city of Wuhan. And unfortunately for us, instead of Western leaders looking at this and saying, oh my God, that's terrible, it would never happen in a free country, they actually said to themselves, well, gee, that looks like a pretty good idea, we better do that too.
Yeah, it's one of those things, Gideon, where I think governments were so caught on the hop, not knowing what to do, given the conflicting information, that the appearance of doing something substantive and justifying it through a campaign and a fear campaign proved that they were showing leadership, and now they've got no other arrows in their quiver. It's very disappointing. But it's not just this lack of health response, though. Talking point number 3. The results of Europe's lockdown experiment are in. That's a study that found that countries with harsher lockdowns suffered more economically. Nations with lengthy, stringent lockdowns, like Italy, for example, performed the worst, while Sweden's economy remained essentially flat while allowing citizens to largely go about life as normal. Gideon, do you remember when Sweden was going to be the international pariah and it was just basically going to be wiped out because of COVID-19 and the refusal to lock down? But it's proved to be a pretty smart play so far, hasn't it?
Yes, well, as I said, Sweden in the end had fewer COVID deaths than the UK, Spain, France, and all sorts of other countries that had very stringent lockdowns indeed. But that's a great point. But Cory, again, we don't need an economic study to tell us that shutting down businesses en masse will destroy an economy. That's basic common sense. What worries me even more than that, though, is that governments seem to be under this impression that they can defy the laws of fiscal and economic reality by effectively spending their way out of the damage that they cause. Now, when has any human civilization ever in world history paid people en masse not to work, paid businesses en masse not to trade? So we have a situation in which more money is being thrown into the economy, less is being produced. This is creating a very, very unstable dynamic. And as bad as things are in Australia right now for all these lockdowns, I fear that it'll look like a golden age compared to what's coming. That is the real hangover of what we have done, and that is where the real misery and deprivation and despair will come in when those economic problems come to fruition.
It's like a day of reckoning, Gideon, in the sense that at the moment we've got the hundreds of billions of dollars that the government splashed and threw into the economy. That is sloshing around. We had a lot of pent-up demand. People are out there flashing the cash if they can and having a good time, hitting the bars and the restaurants. But at some point, reality's got to hit. The government can't continue to throw tens of billions of dollars into the economy every single year. People have to get back to work. You can't pay people to do nothing, otherwise they will do nothing.
Correct.
It's a day of reckoning, I reckon. It's got to be coming, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is. And look, as we said, while ago on your show, Cory, it's time to be looking at inflation-proof assets like Bitcoin.
Oh, that's another conversation altogether. But this show's been pretty good, and you've been pretty smart about picking the issues well ahead of time, Gideon. So, now talking point number 4. Large studies that assess people's mental health before and during COVID-19 have actually reported marked increases in anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress, I should say, since the pandemic began. It is essentially, Gideon, the hidden pandemic, the damage we are doing to people, which could take years, maybe decades, or they may never recover from the actions of the last 12 or 15 months.
No, they might not. And Cory, this is the most sickening thing about all this is the public health brigade that for years have been telling us, with a good point in many respects, about things like the mental health crisis, about the loneliness epidemic, about how much more we have to spend on Medicare rebates for psychology and so on and so forth. They obviously do not care, or the thing seen as a small order issue when they cause this kind of despair en masse. They don't care about the mental health consequences that come from prolonged periods of isolation. They don't care about the fact that children as young as 12 have been put on antidepressants during the course of this lockdown, and they don't seem to care about the other physical health problems that have arose from this lockdown. They missed cancer screenings for one thing. happens to your body if you're locked inside your house for 23 hours a day and you can only go walking outside in fresh air for 1 hour. The fact that we had a baby die in utero because the poor mother of this unborn child couldn't get across the border for urgent medical treatment. The fact that we had 4 babies die in South Australia because they couldn't be airlifted to Melbourne for cardiac surgery. The singular focus on the technocratic business of case numbers and rolling averages and exposure sites as if the building is haunted. They cannot see these public health bureaucrats and unfortunately the politicians who are backing them in, the very real health consequences that are unfolding before our eyes. And I think it's time, and I've said this on Twitter this week, I think it's time after all this is over for somebody on behalf of the broader political class to offer up a national apology to the Australian people for the crimes against the Australians that have been committed during this awful coronavirus saga.
Yeah, the damage is incalculable, and of course they'll tell us they've saved us from ruin by their actions, but in reality I think they've done the opposite. Gideon Rosa, love your work at the IPA and with The Spectator, and I love you having joining me on Bernardi every Friday night. Thanks so much for your time.
Always a pleasure. Thanks so much, Cory.
Well, before we go, let's get into the mailbag tonight. And Sam writes, can you assess if the current state of Victoria has officially reached socialist status? Feels like we're past socialism, heading to communism. Well, Sam, there's not much difference, is there? It's a totalitarian state. They make stuff up, they tell you fibs, they decide what's good for you instead of allowing freedom to reign. The only way you can change it is to vote them out, but we need a really decent opposition over there for that to happen. Daniel says, we need to educate the ignorant about the negative aspects of renewables. The climate change policies promoted by all levels of our Australian government are damaging. And you know what, Daniel? They are damaging. But who wants to hear it? Well, you and I do, and the people who watch this show and this network. But the mainstream media do not want to tell the truth to the people. Renewable energy is more expensive, it's unreliable, and it's not dispatchable. And also the disposal of wind towers and solar panels is an economic and an environmental disaster just waiting to happen. It's terrible. We'll keep singing from the hymn sheet, telling people what they need to know. We'll tell them the truth because we're never frightened of it here. Keep your emails coming in. You'll say at skynews.com.au. I love hearing from you and we'll feature them when we can. But that's it from Bernardi this week. Thanks for joining me. Up next is Jack Houghton with the Media Show and Catherine McGregor with the McGregor Angle. Thanks again. Good night, Australia.
I'm Jack Houghton, and I've spent my career as a journalist breaking stories in newspapers around the country. I know what makes for a good story and a great headline, but I also know the dirty tricks that some of them have used to sway the national conversation, which is why I love to examine mainstream media from every angle. Join me on The Media Show, where I'll be bringing you the biggest media stories of the week and exposing those who've been getting away with dishonest journalism for far too long.
Brand new, The Media Show starts next.
At Carpet, we'd rather sell our stock, not count it. There's carpet, timber, laminate, hybrid, vinyl, rugs, and even made-to-order shutters and blinds.